Welcome back to Life's Challenge. My name is Avital, and this week's Parshat is Parshat Toldot. Parshat Toldot opens up with a discussion about the struggle of Isaac and Rebekah to have children. The Torah tells us that Rebekah was barren for 20 years before she got pregnant. They got married, 20 years passed, they struggled, they prayed fervently, and finally, 20 years after their marriage, Rebekah becomes pregnant. You can only imagine their excitement after such a long period of time to finally be pregnant. And pretty quickly, though, Rebekah realizes that it's not a typical pregnancy. That something is a little bit different here. Because inside of her womb, she feels fighting almost. She feels like these pulls in different directions. And so she inquires of God, like, what is going on here? And this is what God tells Rebekah. He says, quote, "Two nations are in your womb. Two regimes from inside you shall be separated. The might shall pass from one regime to the other, and the elder shall serve the younger." So we learn a couple of things from this conversation with God. First is that she's not pregnant with just one kid, but she's having twins. And also that these twins are going to become their own nations. We also learn from this conversation with God that they already are very different, that these twins have their own personalities. They're struggling with each other from the get-go. They're not sort of like these calm, like happy brothers. They're fighting with each other. And so Rebekah gives birth to these twins, and the first one born is Esau, followed by his brother Jacob. Now the Torah continues to show us that they are very different as people. That Esau loves hunting. He loves being outdoors and being active. And Jacob, he loves studying. They call him a man of the tent, somebody who spends his time inside learning. And that seems pretty normal to me. I have a brother. He loves anything intellectual. He's always reading. He's always learning. He loves facts and information. And I really like anything creative. And that's totally fine and totally normal. It's exactly what you would expect from siblings. But then we get to some parts of the Parsha that are a little bit more difficult to understand. The Torah tells us that, quote, "Isaac loved Esau, for game was in his mouth, but Rebekah loved Jacob." Now to me this is troubling. Was the love that Isaac and Rebekah had for their sons conditional? And was it conditional on their interests and their sort of life pursuits? So that's a pretty big question. And let's come back to it because I think that the next two stories we're going to talk about will help us answer that question. So the first story that we come to in the Parsha after this is the story of the birthright. Now, a birthright in Judaism, at least in the times of the Torah, meant that the firstborn, if it was a male, would get a double portion of his father's inheritance. And so yes, that included materialistic things, but in the case of Isaac, a big portion of what his sons would inherit would be Jewish values, Torah, mitzvot, all of those sorts of things. And so what happens is that one day, Esau comes back from a big hunt and he's exhausted. And sure enough, his brother Jacob is sitting making a lentil soup. And Esau asks Jacob if he can have some of this stew. And Jacob tells him, "Yes, but I'll give it to you in exchange for your birthright." It's basically a sale. Jacob is telling his brother Esau that in exchange for this soup, he wants the birthright. Now, if you're Esau and you're not somebody who's taken a particular interest in Judaism, and it's really not who you are, you really love spending your time outdoors, you like hunting, Judaism, learning, all of those sort of things that you would inherit, it's not really interesting to you. Is this going to be like such a tough question for you? Are you going to be like, no, I really want that birthright? No, it's not going to matter. It's not going to be that important to you. And so sure enough, Esau agrees, and he sells the birthright to his brother Jacob in return for this soup. To me, while there are lots of interpretations, to me this seems like a very amicable agreement. We have these two brothers who recognize that they are different people with different interests. And they are coming to this agreement that, yes, Jacob, it makes more sense for you to have the birthright because you're the one who really loves Judaism. And for me, I want to just keep going in my own path for Esau. And so that seems like they are both being authentically themselves. The story that is a little bit more difficult to understand is when it comes to Isaac blessing his sons. So what happens is that Isaac realizes that he's close to his death, that his life is coming to an end. And so he calls in his son Esau, and he says, Esau, go hunt for me, prepare me these delicacies, bring me a meal, and then I will bless you. And so Esau leaves to do that. But Rebekah overhears this conversation, and she goes to Jacob, and she says, Jacob, hurry, go to our flock, take 2 of the goats, bring them to me. I'm going to prepare them, get dressed in your brother's clothing, and we will go to your father, and you will get a blessing from him. So in order to understand this interaction a little bit better, I want to refer to what Rabbi David Foreman said in his book, in his Parsha companion book, about this interaction. So what Rabbi Foreman says is that the name Esav literally translates to doer. So Esav is a doer. Esav is somebody who likes to get things done. He accomplishes things. He's kind of a leader. It's very natural for him to get things done, to be the doer. But Jacob, that's not his nature. That's just not who he is. And Rebekah at this point really wants Jacob to prove to his father that he too can be a doer. He too can get things done. He too can be a leader. It's not only his brother who has these traits, but he also deserves a blessing for those attributes. And so this is where things start to get a little bit complicated because Jacob is trying to be something he is not. Jacob listens to his mother's, it's actually a command, he listens to his mother, and they prepare these delicacies, he dresses in his brother's own clothing, and he sort of takes on this identity of his brother because he's doing everything his brother does. He's not acting like himself, he's acting like Esau. And he goes so far as when he sees his father to say, I am Esau, or in other words, I am a doer. Look at me. I can also get things done. I can also be a doer. And sure enough, even though this is not Esau himself coming to Isaac for the blessing, Isaac blesses him. He gives him that firstborn blessing. And when Esau realizes what happens, he is really upset. And Esau says that he, meaning Jacob, took away my birthright, and now he took away my blessing. It's interesting because we hadn't seen any upset. Remember, the sale of the birthright in the Torah seemed totally amicable. It seemed totally mutual. And so now why is Esau bringing up that sale of the birthright in addition to the blessing? It's because Esau's feeling kind of replaced now. The things that made him special was being a doer. That was his identity, his personality, being able to go and get things done. And now here his brother is coming and trying to take that away from him or trying to be like, I could be just like you. What's going to make him special at this point? And so he's going back and bringing up that birthright could have made me special. I think we can learn something from this. Jacob and Esau really needed to be their own people. They were so different. They needed their own things to be special. We all want to be special in our parents' eyes for something. And so when we go back to that line, Isaac loved Esau, for game was in his mouth, but Rebekah loved Jacob. It seems from that like Isaac is loving his sons for who they are, for what makes them special. Isaac loves Esau for his hunting and those abilities, and Jacob for his learning. But my theory is that Rebekah, she had expectations for what each of her sons should be. She felt that Esau should be more like Jacob, and in the end, in this interaction, she felt like Jacob should be more like his brother, like Esau. We can learn something really powerful from this. We need to live authentically. We need to be ourselves, fully, completely. We get into trouble when we try to be somebody who we're not. Really, where Jacob gets into trouble and he ends up having to leave his birthplace after this because Esau wants to kill him. Esau's really upset. We get into trouble when we try to be somebody who we're not. And so it's so important to be ourselves and not who others want us to be. In Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch's commentary on the Torah, he says that Isaac and Rebekah failed to recognize their sons as individuals. they had given Jacob and Esau the exact same learning, the same education, the same teaching, the same upbringing, even though they were clearly, from before they were even born, from their conception, different, distinct people with different, distinct interests and paths. And that to treat them the same was a detriment to their ability to grow and to be their own people. Being authentic is really important, and I also don't want it to sound like an excuse to be lazy or not to grow as a person. If, as an example, my authentic self would be, I'm not going to wake up till 4 p.m, and then I'm going to watch TV all day, and that's just authentic, that's an excuse to not do anything, not be productive. We have to find what is authentic for ourselves and channel in a healthy way to be the best version of ourselves. I think while I've been talking a lot about children here and how Isaac and Rebekah were as parents, additionally, it's such a broad concept of God created each and every single one of us as individuals. No two people are the same. Each one of us has a unique purpose in life that only we can fulfill. And so we weren't made to be like anybody else, and nobody else in the world was made to be just like us. I hope that we can take away from this story of Isaac and Rebekah and Jacob and Esau the value of being authentic and of not trying to be like anybody else, because clearly, as we can see in this Torah, it only causes people pain and struggle when they try to be somebody who they aren't. So I hope you all have a wonderful week and a Shabbat Shalom, and I look forward to speaking with you next time.